Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And today, it's being reported that Ukrainian assets have struck both deep inside of Belarus and also have struck targets near Mariupol, way down here. So it appears that some sort of long-range weapon system, be it a drone, a cruise missile, was involved in these strikes, both against the target near Mariupol and the target that was just south of Minsk at this airbase right here. I believe you pronounce that the Machoshchi Air Force Base. Now, we know that Russians were using this airbase as a staging area for both A-50 AWACS, Russian surveillance radar aircraft, looks much like an American AWACS, very large aircraft, while at the same time using this airbase to launch MiG-31K missions, which have the ability and to fire the Dagger semi-ballistic long-range weapon system against Ukrainian targets. And we believe that it's possible that the aforementioned A-50 aircraft could have been used to guide these Dagger missiles against Ukrainian targets. Now, these systems are also GLONASS guided, so is it absolutely necessary that the Russians required the use of these A-50s to guide the Daggers into targets in Ukraine? Probably not. But it definitely appeared that those aircraft sitting on this airbase were a target of opportunity. Now, those targets, those aircraft, aren't present in this satellite photograph. This photograph, if it were to be updated, you would clearly see MiG-31Ks at this airbase, and you would also see one, if not two, A-50 aircraft operating from this airbase as well. Now, the Ukrainian side is reporting that so-called Belarusian partisans, insurgents, attacked this airbase. Now, I find that highly unlikely. You would think that given the current environment, given what's happening in the region, Russian security efforts, Belarusian security efforts would be top-notch at this airbase, especially if the Russians are operating MiG-31Ks. They have a very limited supply, probably around a dozen of these MiG-31Ks that have the ability to launch the Dagger semi-ballistic missile. So again, in all probability, the security level at this airbase would be incredibly high. So the likelihood that you would see some sort of quote-unquote Belarusian insurgent attack against this airbase, and a successful attack, I would have to say, is fairly remote. More likely, this is the result, if in fact that aircraft was hit and destroyed or damaged, it's the result of a long-range drone or cruise missile launched from Ukraine. Now look, we know that going into this conflict, Ukraine is an industrialized nation. They have the ability to create and deploy these long-range systems. And in all likelihood, we have seen the result of an attack by these long-range assets that the Ukrainians have deployed against this airbase. The same if we go down towards Mariupol, way to the south of the conflict. Again, in all probability, it is Ukrainian long-range cruise missiles, drones, or some sort of other weapon system that was involved in the attack on Mariupol recently. So I find it more likely that any attack on Mariupol via quote-unquote Ukrainian partisans or insurgents would happen in Mariupol rather than Belarus. But again, it looks like the Ukrainians are actively deploying long-range weapon systems against targets both in Mariupol and further to the north near Minsk as well. We also know that the Russians have responded. They have launched another series of cruise missile strikes against Ukrainian targets. The Russians could be going after the launching sites of whatever weapon system may have been used in the direction of Minsk. And just for purposes of range, this was a fairly long-distance attack. Again, if we measure from the Belarusian-Ukrainian border, in all likelihood, the attack that the Ukrainians, the weapon systems that the Ukrainians launched, were well behind the border of the shared Ukrainian-Belarusian border. But just from the airbase itself to the border is about 100 and 160 miles. So fairly long distance. Again, in all probability, some sort of cruise missile that the Ukrainians have developed is continuing to be used, and if not that, some sort of drone system that the Ukrainians are deploying as well. We've heard talk that it's possible that the new weapon system that has been provided to the Ukrainians, the ground launch small diameter bomb, could have been used in this attack. Possible. I have no doubt that that system has probably already been handed over to the Ukrainians, and we may start to see that weapon system come into play. But again, it does appear that Russian air defenses, at least when attempting to negate some of these smaller drones, smaller weapon systems, are having difficulty knocking them out of the air. And we have seen that, again, take place in Minsk. We have seen it take place even deeper, hundreds of miles into Russia proper, in which we have seen some of these long-range Ukrainian strikes. Are they having a major impact on the course of the war? Probably not. They are more or less annoyance operations by the Ukrainians, but be that as it may, if you're on the other end of one of these annoyance operations, as I call them, then yeah, absolutely, it's going to have a impact. And any asset that the Russians have, I would say, at this point, outside of Moscow, outside of the central industrial security zone, we know that the most protected air defense area in the Russian Federation is this area around Moscow. And we haven't seen the Ukrainians strike out at a target near Moscow as of yet. Now, obviously, that would be a significant escalation, and that would probably draw the further attention of the Russians towards targets deeper inside of Ukraine. What could the Russians do at this point that they already have not done? Difficult to say. I think at this point, the Russians, if they were going to expand their targeting of both their aircraft, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, would have to continue to degrade the Ukrainian air defense capabilities, as especially very well active in western Ukraine and near Kiev. This continues to be a very robust air defense environment that the Ukrainians, along with their Western allies, continue to trouble Western attacks. And again, it's not so much the fact that the Ukrainians can see everything that's coming into Ukraine proper. They can, with the help of the United States. Long-range United States surveillance aircraft are giving the Ukrainians real-time data 24/7 right now. So even if the Russians were able to target, destroy all long-range early warning systems in Ukraine, which for the most part they have, again, the big issue for the Russians is the fact that these NATO aircraft sitting off in eastern Poland, eastern Romania, quite possibly over Moldova, and I believe as well other aircraft, other classified system, classified operations are continuing over Ukraine. And as I've said this before, this probably involves F-35s, F-22s that are operating over Western Ukraine, keeping an eye on Ukrainian airspace and directing Ukrainian air defense assets against Russian targets as they enter Ukraine. And we anticipate that will continue. Nothing has changed. Now, obviously, could there be an escalation if the Russians were to target one of these aircraft in eastern Poland? I would not rule that out at a certain point. Again, if we continue to see some of these operations by the Ukrainians against targets near Minsk, obviously that threatens to draw Belarus into the conflict as well. Hasn't done it yet. Looks like Belarus is very hesitant about entering this conflict. Again, the Russians continue to use Belarus as staging areas and have launched offensive operations out of Belarus, but we haven't really seen the Belarusian military per se become involved in this ongoing war. It's really Russian forces inside of Belarus. But again, additional attacks by Ukrainian forces against targets deep inside Russian territory, i.e. Belarus. Again, targets near Mariupol were hit by Ukrainian assets. We don't believe these were partisan strikes. We believe these were long-range weapon systems. Again, either Ukrainian origin or ground-launched small-diameter bombs attacking at top apogee glide mode against targets on the ground. But that's where we sit for today. We continue to watch things very, very closely, both in the air, on the ground, and the political sphere as well. Thank you for joining us today. More to come in the very, very near future. Have a good day.